Hey everyone, welcome to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. In the Mobile User Acquisition Show, we talk about how to use mobile user acquisition strategies to grow your app quickly and capital efficiently. The Mobile User Acquisition Show is presented by me, Shamant Rao, mobile growth leader and founder and CEO of the mobile growth consulting firm Rocketship HQ. Each episode includes strategies, tips, and pointers from the leading edge of mobile user acquisition that you can use to unlock tremendous growth for your app in a sustainable and capital-efficient manner. Our guest today is Maor Sadra, co-founder and CEO at Incremental. In today's episode, we dive into how lasttouch attribution has always been fraught with inaccuracies and how measuring incrementality might just be the best way to understand what the true impact of your digital marketing is. I'm very excited to welcome Maor Sadra to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. Maor, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shamant, and thank you for making the extra effort to try to pronounce my name correctly. It's a common joke that my name gets butchered. I'm fine with it, but thank you for making the extra effort and inviting me.
Absolutely, Maor. So I'm definitely thrilled to have you because certainly I've learned quite a lot from what you've shared on public forums and communities just over the last couple of months as we've all tried to make sense of the changes coming our way. So definitely, I think you've offered some very unique and interesting perspectives on how to approach measurement in a few months. And, it's definitely something I'm thrilled to dive into with you today. To start off, Maor, until now, lasttouch has been the most widely prevalent way to attribute and measure performance on mobile. And you have expressed that it's always been problematic. Can you tell us what have been some of the key problems associated with lasttouch attribution?
Yeah. So I think we need to remember that lasttouch attribution is prevalent because there was no real other options, basically. It's like if you come from offline advertising or desktop advertising, you know of the option of a media mix modeling, you know of an option of multitouch attribution, you know how to actually look at the entire funnel because you do own your domain. If you're, let's take Uber, you in the desktop, you would own uber.com and you would know the traffic coming to uber.com and can analyze it and can come up with your own attribution model based on your user behavior. In mobile, it wasn't the case. So like when the app stores were launched, there was no real way to get any tracking done. And back then, the 2012, the attribution companies were kind of launched. All of them were UDAD device tracking. Later on, UDAD got deprecated and replaced with IDFA, Google AID. But still, the way that the attribution or MMP companies did their tracking is they were tracking everything, impressions, clicks, wherever they could. And I think a lot because the big platforms, when Facebook started their Facebook Mobile, from day one, they were self-attributing. And from day one, in order for an MMP to join the MMP program and to basically send their post back to Facebook and so on, and later Google as well, the way to do so was to send them all installs. So the MMP service for developers was they're going to deduplicate everything and they're going to show you who was the last one to touch. Now, from here to becoming an absolute truth, this is the source that generated my install, my conversion. I think that was a stretch that the industry, for some reason, just accepted. Everybody just accepted. Now, it doesn't make sense because if you think how marketing works, there is a funnel, AIDA, that's the short for it. It's awareness, interest, desire, action. So usually it takes some time for users to get to know the product, maybe explore it, click it, download it, use it, spend money in it, and so on. And to give 100% credit to whoever just tapped the user last, especially in our industry, actually created a notion of fraud. Because if you're a fraudulent publisher and you know that you just need to tap the user, win an install, and sometimes that's $5 to $10 for a single install, it becomes a very easy system to actually manipulate, and it became quite messy. And I think that, well, I don't doubt the attribution companies' place in the industry, but I think that what is like last touch point attribution simply did not allow you to understand incremental value you're getting as an advertiser.
Yeah, and you make a good point about the last touch being very easy to gain for anybody that wants to be unscrupulous, including, I would say, Facebook and Google. You know, it's funny, I was having a conversation with somebody where we said, look, if an ad tech company claims the last click or the impression, it's called fraud. If Facebook does it, they call it self-attribution, but it's essentially the same modus operandi. The last touch can be problematic in very many ways. And you would think that the solution to the problem of last touch is multi-touch attribution. Now, with that said, very few companies have adopted multi-touch attribution. We had an episode of the show where we talked with Holly Chen from Slack, and she talked about how and why Slack adopted it. In fact, they were like, oh, we are growing like gangbusters on mobile, but our mobile LTV is so low. And that was just because the last touch model wasn't working. So they built out a multi-touch model. With that said, why would you say nearly every other company has not built out multi-touch models?
Yeah, so I think Slack, by the way, is a good example of a unique advertiser who's B2B. I guess a lot of the usability is on the app, but the registration, the payment, that probably happens mostly through web. Now, when your conversion point ends in web, you're much better off trusting the web funnel because, again, they own the domain. So they're always able to understand where the users have been before they came to their website. They know the funnel. There's the UTC, not UTCs, MTAs. And they're really able to actually control it, both tracking and create an attribution model from themselves. Now, again, when you have a website and when you funnel users to convert through the website, makes a lot of sense. When you funnel users to convert via mobile, this is where you cannot do multi-touch. And actually, when I was working on the startup that I'm building now, original idea was multi-touch. Original idea was we're going to go to advertisers, developers, we're going to build attribution as a service for them. So it sits on their domain, and then we can get all the data. And of course, you cannot really get all the data. Facebook, Google, Amazon, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, Pinterest, all of these are self-reporting, self-attributing. And now, of course, with this iOS 14 change, it's like, again, changes everything. So I'm very glad we didn't do it because it's not really possible to be, to offer multi-touch attribution in a mobile environment. Plus, because you have this like behemoths that are self-reporting, the amount of overlap you're going to see is close to 100%. As long as you have a product that is mass market, everybody's going to touch the same users. So if you know, no one talks about the reach anymore, but Google, Facebook, they have the same reach. Amazon has a pretty significant reach as well. So when all of them are basically claiming, well, we showed the user an ad, we generated the install, you have a little bit of a challenge to actually try to even apply multi-touch. One way to do multi-touch in mobile would be communism. Take your budget, divide it by the number of vendors you have. That's your multi-touch.
Yeah.
You get the point.
Yeah, just so I understand this more clearly, you're saying, look, the touches might happen on Facebook, on Google, on Snapchat, on TikTok, and you don't have access to that data as to where, or you have access to data as reported by them, which is not reliable enough to form a multi-touch model?
I would more say the first. So I think that the data is probably reliable. Like I think that there's a reason why these platforms are so good for developers, because they have crazy reach and crazy targeting abilities. But the overlap, so you're gonna basically end up seeing almost all the time the same users being touched by all of them, because all of them have a reach that is close to 100%.
Right. So theoretically, isn't that the problem MTA is supposed to solve? Because, oh, everyone has the same reach, but users saw Facebook first, Google second, Snap third. Let's allocate the install and the spend between these three. That's the problem MTA is supposed to solve.
Should, but that's the data you're not getting on mobile. So you're not getting impression level data or click level data from Facebook. I think from Google, you're able to get clicks in retrospect. But when you have even Facebook, just Facebook by themselves, if they're not disclosing this and you are a B2C advertiser, that's 30-40% of the market that you're just missing out on.
Right. So you're getting aggregate impression and click data, but not individual user level data.
Exactly.
And therefore you couldn't do this.
Just so you're clear, it's like the attribution companies today, take any of them, they are not getting this data from Facebook. So the only thing they do, actually, they don't get anything from Facebook other than Facebook telling them, here's the last time we saw this user. So we claim this install, whether if you like it or not. The attribution company will say, we look in their system and say, well, no, it was Unity who generated the last click. So Unity wins the install on our platform. Facebook doesn't care. They will still claim install.
Right.
And that's kind of the challenges with this model. That's why we decided not to go for multi-touch.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly. And again, just to dwell on it, that a little bit more before we go on, you said on web, it's less of a problem. And if you own your, so I understand that aspect correctly, if you own your domain, you will get individual user click data and impression data. Is that what happens?
Well, let's take a Facebook. Facebook click from web goes to your uber.com, slack.com. It's a direct access. It's not to the App Store where you need third party to kind of triangulate the data, whether if it's IDFA matching or fingerprint matching. You're basically relying on a third party to kind of triangulate the data and tell you, this is whoever did it. When you own the domain, you don't need anyone for it, basically.
Right. So you could basically say user ID number 25 came from Facebook.
Exactly.
Because they're tagged with it.
Yeah, you set up the URL on Facebook and you set up the URL to your domain with your parameters. So you have full control, and that's only on web.
Gotcha. Now, I see exactly how that works. So clearly, for those reasons, MTA can be challenging to make work in mobile. And another way to measure performance would just be to measure incrementality, or to understand what the lift is from any element in the media mix. Can you describe at a high level what is this approach and how a marketer might adopt it in a post iOS 14 paradigm?
Yeah. So in my view, by the way, what Apple did is good for the industry. Many people, by the way, I'm an opinionated person. Many people, of course, think differently, but the fact that Apple eliminates this option of user level tracking without full user consent, with a pretty, aggressive pop-up, and an alternative that is SK Ad Network that works on an aggregate level, campaign level, and not individual user click install, in my view is good, because the way marketing works, marketing is not deterministic. Like, I wish it was, but it's not. And often we want to tell ourselves it's very deterministic. We know exactly what generated, what caused this install, but it's not causality that we often know. We know correlation. Often, we run a bunch of ads, we see a lot of installs, it's fine. As long as you work with one vendor, you can very much understand your incremental value. But what happens when you work with 10 and 15 and 60? And that's the average marketer works with between 15 and 60 different vendors. Now add countries, add various apps. You start really getting lost in the data. When you were only relying on last touch point attribution, you're just seeing reports that tell you whoever touched the user last, but you start losing grip of, is this actually valuable, this spend? Would I've gotten these users for free? And often what causes advertisers to realize that maybe we're spending a little bit too much is something that is not related to marketing. So needing to stop the campaigns because you have some issue or bug or running out of budgets. Or in the Uber case, it was the delete Uber hashtag in the US that made them kind of stop advertising. I'm pretty sure now, by the way, with this pandemic, many advertisers who paused advertising for budget management, I'm not talking about the travel industry, which is massively hurt, but if you're an advertiser who stopped advertising for budget management, suddenly you look at your KPIs and you might be thinking, my numbers should be significantly lower right now, but they're not. And yes, there is a halo effect, and yes, there is an organic effect from your advertising, but now that you will reactivate your campaigns, maybe you'll do it a bit smartly. Now, challenge is that, like, to do incrementality testing sporadically once in a while doesn't really allow you to continuously optimize what you're doing. I know one advertiser, very big gaming casual company, who does this test once a year, stops all advertising, reactivates vendor by vendor, and they do manage to cut away 50% of their budget every year by doing so. Now, just imagine if they could be doing this ongoingly. And if you think offline, Coca-Cola, great example, Nike, great example, they run a campaign for a set limited period of time, okay, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks. They stop the campaign, and then they rely on panel reporting, survey reporting, sales reports. They rely on reports in retrospect to kind of help them reevaluate what was my media mix. Did I actually see an increase in sales for the product I was advertising? If they don't, they can actually now do it better for the next time. And they do get better and better and better. But none of them tries to conclude that what they're doing is deterministic. I think that's, it's a little bit of the arrogancy we have in digital advertising, because we've been in digital advertising, and for us, offline is what we see on Mad Men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think determinism, I think it's always been imperfect. In fact, we had an episode of our podcast that went out yesterday. I think one of the things I said in that is LTV has always been a made up number. And even if you say it is deterministic, you're making up numbers because, and I have been in fairly big companies where people fought about how to define LTV, and it just came down to corporate politics, right? Somebody was like, oh, we need to take 2-year LTV. We need to take K factor. We need to take 50% K factor. We need to give a big launch budget because we have an IP behind it. So there's still so much subjectivity. So it just, I think it was just a very imperfect metric to begin with. So certainly it makes sense as to the approach you do describe, which is, look, what is the incremental that we can see from any campaign or any initiative or a channel? So you did say, look, on mobile, some of the bigger companies run anywhere from 15 to 60 channels, multiplied by countries, multiplied by apps. Now, with that sort of a media mix, how would you recommend that a marketer think about isolating variables that have an impact versus those that don't, right? And as to provide a little more context, right? So it's like, out of 15, if you stop one, you may or may not see a lift. So how should they think about this? How should they think about modeling it if they're sitting down with their data scientists at this point?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit kind of like leaning towards what we're doing, but I would say that, so the way incrementality testing works today, Facebook offers incrementality testing, Many DSPs, specifically in retargeting area, offers incrementality pricing even. Now, if you're a single platform, and as long as you have access to user level data, you can create control groups. You can, of course, separate them and show them PSA, ghost ads, whatever. Challenge is there still, you don't know what these users see outside my platform. So I would say that, you know, Facebook's incrementality testing tool, it's a great sales tool for Facebook, same as for most DSPs who offer it. It's a fantastic sales tool because you can actually show your customer, hey, look, I am adding value for you on my platform based on what I can show you. But indeed, you still don't know if the spend itself is actually adding incremental value. Now, our approach, what I'm building in, like what we're building in our company is we're using causal inference. So we're using algorithms that basically look at difference in difference, change. Change is actually the most important parameter for us, because with change, we can start creating these branches in time, in retrospect, to come up with recommendations. We're not claiming to be deterministic, again, because I simply do not believe in determinism in marketing. But yeah, that's kind of the approach. I know that many customers that we spoke with, you know, interviewing to understand what should we be building, many of them tested or tried to do incrementality tests, but either they end up with correlation, like, you know, it's hot outside, so I have a fan on me, amazing, but they don't reach causation. And reaching causation or causality, English is a second language for me, is way more important, is way more difficult. And of course, I think many are still trying to do it with the notion of real time and the notion of determinism. I think Apple forces everybody for a paradigm change, which it'll take some time for people to adapt because everybody's still used to how things were, and that's never going to happen again.
Yeah. And I think making that shift for the first time is going to be a challenge, but people will hopefully get used to the new way of doing things soon enough. Yeah. So in an incrementality model or paradigm, how should a marketer think about small changes? For instance, again, if they have 25 channels, they're like, oh, I want to test TikTok on a very small scale, maybe $500 a day to see if it works. That's the model that has been used until this point. Is that model going to go out the window, or how should they think about testing initiatives before scaling them?
Yeah, so let's for example, talk about creative, because creative changes sometimes are very subtle, but they mean a lot. Now there, for example, this is where last touch point attribution is a fantastic proxy, because conversion rate between click and an install based on last touch point in the same vendor means a lot. And if you have two creatives and one of them has 1% and one of them has 2%, that's 100% difference. So I'm very glad that Apple actually gave people SKAd network, which is a deterministic way to do last touch point attribution. It sucks that they didn't yet add creative ID. For some reason, it was completely ignored, but I'm fairly certain they will add it later. But again, last touch point attribution is fantastic as a proxy for real-time attribution. If you're doing programmatic and you're buying on CPM and you're spending quite a lot of money, last touch point attribution is your best proxy to know, am I actually wasting money completely or am I getting something? It still doesn't mean that you shouldn't, in addition, look at your incremental lift. So, you know, what we're building is not coming to say, we're going to replace the attribution companies. We're not there. We don't think we'll ever be there. But I think that there was a blind spot, and this was value measurement. And I always use the Uber example because Uber was like, you know, it's a public case that everybody knows. And it was massive, and they did everything supposedly right, but they still got it wrong.
Yeah. Totally. And if you are advertising only on one channel, let's just say on Facebook alone, is the incrementality approach helpful or not? Or if so, how would you recommend somebody use it?
Yeah, well, I would say that if you, it really, of course, depends on your scale and size, but let's say if you're starting up and you're running a 20K a month spend and it's all on Facebook in single country, single campaign, you're optimizing for creative, I would still do a sporadic check here and there, stop the campaign for a few days, because if you're spending that little, it's not that significant. Ideally, I would still do sporadic checks just to constantly optimize how much you're actually getting out of this spend. But of course, it's not as important for you if you're running multiple platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Right. And as the number of your platforms and channels increase, I think your budgets are much larger, so you have much more at stake. And certainly this becomes much, much more significant as you grow your media mix. Now, this has been very instructive, and definitely I think we are on the cusp of some massive changes. And I certainly learned so much from our chat just now, much as I have from reading your writings thus far. This is perhaps a good place for us to start to wrap up. But before we do that, could you tell our listeners how they can find out more about you and everything you're doing?
Yeah, so first I'm on Mobile Dev Memo, pretty active there. LinkedIn as well, Maor Sadra, Incremental.com as well, minus two of the vowels in the middle. It doesn't make it easier.
Sure. Sure. We will link to it so people can just click and go there.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. So we will link to incremental.com and of course your LinkedIn just as well. Would you like to tell us a bit more about what Incremental is and what you guys do?
Yeah, sure. So we're a pretty young company. We just launched, well, we actually founded the company only this month, but we already started full-time on it since April. We've been researching the topic for a while. So what Incremental is, it's a software company. It provides testing tools for incrementality for app developer advertisers. Again, we were not counting on Apple doing this change and putting us in a more hyped positioning, but indeed, now incrementality testing is exactly what many marketers would need with this change. So yeah, I'm glad that we're doing this because it solves a big problem that has been aching me for a while. I come from 20 years of media. So I've always wondered, am I actually giving value? And now I'll be able to answer this question. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. And you're going to be able to answer this question without having anything very deterministic, right? And which is what I find very impressive about everything you've described and the approach you described on today's interview as well. Maor, this is a good place for us to wrap. Thank you again for being on the Mobile User Acquisition Show.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
For more tips, pointers, and strategies from the leading edge of mobile user acquisition, subscribe to our YouTube channel right here, or check out our blog, rocketship.hq.com/blog. Thank you.